This is the Dive Into Discovery podcast, where curiosity meets insight, and every conversation uncovers a new layer of understanding.
Welcome to our deep dive. We're tackling the Cambrian Explosion today. You send us some really interesting stuff on this, and we're excited to dig in. So picture this, right? 540 million years ago, Earth, but not as we know it. Life's pretty simple. And then bam.
Yeah. It's not just like evolution took a step forward. It's like a giant leap. I mean, we see the appearance of most of the major animal groups we see around us today, like everything from ancient jellyfish and insects, even the ancestors of us vertebrates.
Well, it's like suddenly someone hit the fast forward button on evolution. Right? So how do we know all this?
Fossils.
Right, the fossil record.
Exactly. And there are these amazing places like the Burgess Shale in Canada or the Chengjiang site over in China. It's like they're treasure chests of Cambrian fossils.
So what makes these sites so special? I mean, we find fossils all over the place, right?
Well, most fossils, are just the hard parts, the shells and bones. But these sites, they preserved the soft-bodied creatures too.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, it's pretty rare. And I mean, it gives us this incredible window, into the diversity of life back then.
It's like a snapshot of a lost world.
Oh, and it's not just the body structures. We've got these trace fossils too, burrows and tracks, so we can see how these animals moved and interacted with each other.
So we've got this incredible record showing this burst of evolution. But the big question is, what triggered it?
Well, there are a lot of theories, but one of the leading contenders is oxygen. Or, more specifically, the rise of oxygen in the atmosphere.
Okay, so back then the Earth's atmosphere was different.
Oh yeah. Early Earth, very little oxygen. But then gradually the levels started going up, probably because of photosynthesis, more and more photosynthetic organisms. And this was a game changer.
Yeah, because oxygen is basically fuel for life, right?
Exactly. With more oxygen, life could get bigger. You could have larger, more complex organisms, ones with, higher energy demands. It also made biomineralization possible, the ability to build shells and skeletons.
So not just bigger, but tougher, right?
Right. And speaking of tougher, this is also when we see the first real predators. Phenomelochers. I mean, imagine this thing was like a meter long, shrimp-like, but with these spiky, grasping appendages and these big, complex eyes.
Anomalocharus. That's a mouthful.
And probably a mouthful of whatever it could catch.
I wouldn't want to run into that in the ocean.
It probably sparked a bit of an arms race, Predators evolving to be better hunters, and prey evolving defenses like spines and shells.
Makes sense. Survival of the fittest. But, I mean, you've got this rise in oxygen and then predators enter the scene. It's like a perfect storm for driving evolution, don't you think?
Yeah, and it wasn't just external factors. There were some really important changes happening at the genetic level, too.
Like what?
Well, one of the biggest was the evolution of these things called Hox genes. They're these master control genes, and they dictate an organism's body plan, like where the head goes, the limbs, the overall structure.
So like the blueprint for how an animal is put together.
Yeah, and even a tiny change in a Hox gene could have a huge impact on body shape. And scientists think that maybe during the Cambrian, these Hox genes were evolving really rapidly. That could explain the crazy diversity we see in the fossil record.
Okay, so we've got oxygen, predators, and genes all mixing it up. But it can't just be about what's happening inside the creatures, right? I mean, the environment itself must have played a role, too.
Oh, definitely. As continents moved and oceans changed, it created all these new habitats, new niches, new opportunities for life to, diversify and fill them. It was like a whole new world opening up.
No, it makes sense. But before we move on, shouldn't we talk about what came before the Cambrian explosion? There was life on Earth before that, right?
Yeah, so you're talking about the Ediacaran biota.
The Ediacaran biota.
Yeah, they were this group of soft-bodied organisms, and they thrived for millions of years before the Cambrian. Really mysterious, often with these kind of fractal-like forms. And they dominated the Ediacaran period.
So what happened to them?
Well, that's one of the big mysteries. They disappeared pretty suddenly just before the Cambrian.
So did they go extinct? Or get outcompeted by all the new Cambrian critters?
We don't know for sure. There are lots of theories, but it's still an open question.
Wow. So we've got oxygen, predators, genetic innovations, ecological opportunities, and the mystery of the disappearing Ediacarans. This is like a detective story on a planetary scale. But is there one definitive answer to what caused the Cambrian explosion?
Honestly, it's probably not that simple. It was likely a combination of all these factors, maybe even some we haven't discovered yet. And, some scientists think it was a really sudden event, this explosion, while others think it might have been more gradual.
So the debate continues.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes it so fascinating, right? It's not just about finding the answer, but appreciating the complexity of it all.
That's a good point. So we've laid the groundwork, but what about the stars of the show? Can we meet some of these Cambrian celebrities?
Oh, yeah. Next time we'll delve into the weird and wonderful world of Cambrian creatures. And trust me, they're pretty wild.
So give me the rundown. What were some of these creatures like?
Well, the Cambrian explosion wasn't just about, numbers, it was about diversity. It was like evolution decided to try out every possible body plan.
So paint me a picture. What's one of the weirdest creatures that showed up during this time?
Okay, so Opabenia, 5 eyes, a mouth that faces backwards, and a long proboscis, kind of tipped with claws.
5 eyes and a backwards mouth. That's pretty out there. What was that thing doing, hunting in reverse?
Well, that's what makes the Cambrian so cool. It was like a time of such evolutionary freedom that, even the most bizarre designs could survive, find their niche.
So it's not just about being weird for the sake of it, right? These features, they must have given them some kind of advantage.
Right. Every adaptation, no matter how strange it might seem to us now, it was likely, a solution to some problem they were facing. Like, take hallucigenia, for example. Spiky legs, tentacle things on its back, and a head that, well, it was tough to tell which end was which.
I've seen pictures of hallucigenia. It's like a walking cactus with an identity crisis.
Yeah. But here's the thing, right? Hallucigenia, it left behind a ton of fossils. So even though it looks like a mess to us, it must have been doing something right.
Okay, so Opabenia with its 5 eyes, hallucigenia walking on its head. It sounds like the Cambrian seas were a real freak show. But, were there any, hints of the body plans we see today?
Oh, definitely. Remember, this is where the ancestors of, most modern animal groups first appear. And even within those groups, you see this amazing diversity. Take arthropods, for example, insects, spiders, crabs.
Right, arthropods.
Yeah, so the Cambrian, you had this whole range of early arthropods all trying out different things.
So not just one ancestral arthropod, but a whole bunch of them, experimenting.
Exactly. Some were filtering food, some were predators, some had tons of legs, some had just a few. It was like evolution was trying out all the options.
Speaking of options, we talked about skeletons before. What was happening with those during the Cambrian?
Well, skeletons, they were huge. Not only did they protect these animals from predators, but, they also gave them support. They could grow bigger, move more efficiently.
It's kind of like the difference between a jellyfish and a crab, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, suddenly these creatures had a framework to build on.
It sounds like each innovation, like oxygen, predators, skeletons, it created this opportunity for even more innovation.
Right, exactly. It's like this chain reaction. And, it wasn't just about, individual innovations. It was about how these changes impacted the entire ecosystem.
So what do you mean?
Well, before the Cambrian, most organisms were just, filter feeders or scavengers. But with predators and these, more complex bodies, we start to see these really complex food webs emerging.
Right, it's like the whole food chain got an upgrade.
Exactly. You had herbivores, you had predators, you had scavengers, all interacting in these really intricate ways.
It's almost like the whole concept of an ecosystem was being invented,
Yeah. The Cambrian explosion wasn't just about new creatures. It was about new ways of living.
Yeah.
New ways of interacting with each other and the environment.
So it's not just the evolution of creatures, but of how they live their lives,
Right. And this new complexity, it really shaped the future of life on Earth. It set the stage for the diversity and the interconnectedness we see in ecosystems today.
It's mind-blowing to think that something that happened, 500 million years ago is still impacting us today.
It is. But before we get ahead of ourselves, is there anything else about these Cambrian creatures that you find particularly, interesting?
Like what?
Well, I think it's fascinating that these creatures, they were actually pretty sophisticated for their time.
Sophisticated? How so?
Well, like Anomalocaris, that predator we were talking about. It had really complex eyes, some of the most advanced in the Cambrian. And trilobites, those iconic armored arthropods.
Sure, trilobites.
So they had these really well-developed eyes, too. Some even had hundreds of lenses.
Wow. So it wasn't just about, being tough or fast. It was about sensing the world around them in new ways.
Exactly. And, these senses, they drove the evolution of behavior, too. Like some trilobites, they had these spines and other defenses that, well, it looks like they might have been engaging in some complex predator-prey interactions. They might have even been using, visual signals to communicate with each other.
So it wasn't just a random jumble of weird creatures, but, a world with complex behaviors and interactions.
Right. And, this brings us to a really important point. I mean, the Cambrian explosion wasn't just about, new things appearing. It also laid the groundwork for, intelligence and complex behavior in the lineages that came later.
So all those innovations, they had this ripple effect that lasted way beyond the Cambrian.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a reminder that even though it happened so long ago, it's still shaping the world around us.
Wow. I'm starting to see the Cambrian explosion in a whole new light. It's like, it's not just this weird chapter in Earth's history, but like this foundational event that led to everything that came after.
Yeah.
Including us.
And that's what's so cool about studying the past, right? It helps us understand the present, even glimpse the future. But before we, get too far ahead, I think it's time to answer the big question. What does this all mean for us today?
It's amazing, right? I mean, all this stuff, the rise of oxygen, the predators, all these crazy new body plans, and then these ecosystems like exploding with complexity. And it all happens so fast. Well, not fast for us, but geologically speaking.
Yeah, it really shows you how powerful evolution can be, when life has a chance to, try new things.
Okay, but here's the question that keeps popping into my head. Why should we care about this? I mean, it happened over 500 million years ago. It's cool and all, but does it, really matter to us today?
Oh, it totally matters. The Cambrian explosion, it wasn't just some, random event in the past. It completely changed the course of life on Earth. Even our own existence is tied to it.
Wait, so you're saying if the Cambrian explosion hadn't happened, humans might not even be here?
Exactly. All those body plans that evolved back then, they laid the foundation for, every animal that came after. It's like the Cambrians set the rules for the game of evolution, and we're still playing by those rules today.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. It's like we're looking back at the roots of our own family tree, and there's this incredible burst of, creativity and experimentation that led to us.
Yeah, and it's a good reminder that even though we think of ourselves as, separate from nature, we're really a product of these ancient evolutionary processes.
It makes you feel pretty small,
Yeah.
to think that our existence is so connected to something that happened that long ago. But it's also kind of exciting. I mean, if this kind of explosion of life happened here, could it have happened somewhere else?
Yeah.
Like on another planet?
That's actually a huge question in the search for, alien life. The Cambrian explosion shows us that life can, evolve and diversify really quickly under the right conditions. So it's totally possible that something similar could have happened on other planets.
Imagine that, alien ecosystems with all these bizarre creatures. It's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. And, even though we haven't found proof of life out there yet, just thinking about it is pretty inspiring, right?
Definitely. So I guess we've answered our question. The Cambrian explosion, it's not just ancient history. It's like this key to understanding life itself, both here on Earth and maybe even out there in the universe. But I'm curious, if you could travel back in time to the Cambrian, what do you think would be the most surprising thing you'd see?
Honestly, I think it would be how alien everything would look. Imagine an ocean full of these creatures we've never seen before, with colors and patterns we can't even imagine. The sights, the sounds, even the smells, it would be like nothing we've ever experienced.
It's like trying to imagine a completely different planet, even though it's our own, just, way back in time. Okay, one last question. If our listener wants to dive deeper into all this, what's a good book to start with?
Oh, definitely Wonderful Life by Stephen Jay Gould. It's a classic, and it really captures, the wonder and the importance of the Cambrian explosion.
Wonderful Life by Stephen Jay Gould. Got it. Well, I think that about wraps up our Cambrian adventure. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.
It's been a blast, and the story of evolution is still being written, so who knows what amazing discoveries are still out there waiting for us.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep into the mysteries of our incredible universe.
What did you think of this week's episode? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to join us next time as we dive even deeper. And as always, stay curious, because you never know what discoveries are just around the corner.